The tale of Icarus is probably one of the more famous in the modern day when it comes to Greek mythology. It's odd really though because Icarus only appears in literally one story. His father Daedalus appears far, far more often and has quite an interesting story. So we're going to go into that. Daedalus, his name shares links to an Etruscan hero, Title. Icarus actually shares a similar link to Vicaron or Vicaron, which linguistically they're derived from the same word, but we don't know what they actually mean. Daedalus or Daedalae, the term is Homerically linked to things of fine craftsmanship or artful work, which is fitting because Daedalus was a master craftsman, most significantly for statues and architecture, but pretty much he was a massive inventor, the Da Vinci of his day. He is said to have been an Athenian, living in the mighty, mighty city of Athens. Beautiful city, never been, but really want to. He invented lots of things, it is said, anyway, including, like I say, some very, very, very good statues. He had a nephew called Perdix, or Talos, or Kalos, depending on the version you use, but I'm going to call him Perdix to avoid confusion with the Talos of Crete, which is a giant, which is a bronze statue that doesn't occur in these stories, but is an interesting talking point nonetheless. Anyway, Perdix was somewhat of an inventor himself and an apprentice as such to Daedalus. Perdix was said to even succeed his mentor. He invented the saw, apparently, after looking at the bones of a fish. He also invented the compass, not as in the magnetic compass, but as in the compass. I don't really actually know how to describe a compass other than the compass. So Daedalus got quite jealous of his nephew. So he took him up to the Acropolis and pushed him off. Just straight up killed him. No qualms about that. Which, generally murdering someone on its own, generally bad. Murdering someone on the site of a god's temple, that's slightly worse. For the gods, anyway. So Athena obviously took exception to this and decided to save Perdix. I use that term very loosely because she turned him into a partridge, which is not what I'd define as saving someone. Being turned into a relatively flightless little bird, not my idea of being saved, but who am I to question the gods? So, at least he lived. Athena then made sure Athens knew, and Daedalus was, in some counts he was actually tried, in some counts he just fled the city out of shame. Regardless, he leaves and he goes to Crete. Some say he's exiled, but there he enters the service of King Minos. Now, King Minos, he was the son, I believe, of Europa. Yes, son of Europa. He, probably the most famous king of Crete, was what gives rise to the Minoan culture as a name, which was the historical culture on Crete. So there, probably one of his most famous works was designing Ariadne's courtyard. Ariadne was King Minos' daughter. Ariadne features a lot later in the story as well. Daedalus famously created that. It was described in the Iliad, actually, said by Homer to be so beautiful and where loads of courtesans and playwrights and so forth dance and play music and just have a really good time. Sounds just quite a nice place, really, especially considering we're in fucking lockdown. It'd be nice to have somewhere open like that. Anyway, so at the time, there was a little bit of a kerfuffle going on, shall we say, with King Minos and some of his brothers sort of having a contest to see who would become king of Crete. He still considered himself king and so forth, but hey-ho. So he made a prayer to Poseidon, said, "Send me a great bull so that I can sacrifice it to you and prove how worthy I am to be king," which is really, really cyclical, But sure, so Poseidon did grant King Minos a bull, then he said, no, actually I like that bull too much, I'm going to sacrifice a different bull to you, and Poseidon wasn't very happy. So, because gods do weird shit when they're not very happy, Poseidon decided to make King Minos' wife, Pasiphae, fall in love with this bull. Completely and irrevocably in love with this bull, so that she could not love this bull. So Pasiphae approaches Daedalus and says to her, I want to cop off with that bull. Can you help me? It's probably not how she approached that subject, but how do you approach a subject like that? Daedalus says, okay, I guess, and makes her a wooden bull for her to climb inside. Which, sure, I assume he put in necessary access holes, as it were. He then covers this bull, or cow, rather, in cowhide, and she climbs inside and then proceeds to do the nasty with this bull. And falls pregnant by this bull. And then eventually gives birth to someone we have all heard of, the Minotaur. Now, because of this, Minos has Daedalus create the labyrinth, the very, very famous labyrinth, to hold the Minotaur, because he was an abomination as far as Minos was concerned and didn't want him to taint his legacy like that. And ends up in a war with Athens, sacrifices coming in to give to the Minotaur. Again, I probably will go into that one in a bit more depth another time, because it's a whole separate sub-story in itself, Theseus killing the Minotaur and the story behind it. Anyway, yeah, Theseus is one of the ones sent to be sacrificed, but King Minos' daughter Ariadne was hopelessly in love with Theseus, and she begs Daedalus to create a way for Theseus to escape the labyrinth. So he gives her what has become colloquially known as Ariadne's clue, which was just a ball of yarn, really, which, you know, as far as his inventions go, like you think, statues, sails and masts and so forth, a bit of yarn. It's not great, is it? So Theseus then kills the Minotaur, gets out of the labyrinth. Minos is pissed, and he is going to come after Daedalus. Whilst he was on Crete, by the way, Daedalus was allowed to marry one of Minos' slave girls, Naukrete. I think that's the pronunciation. I couldn't actually find a good version for that, but Naukrete or Naukrete or something along those lines. And they have a son they call Icarus. Anyway, Naukrete dies or just never gets mentioned again, and Daedalus and Icarus decide to escape. Now, they know they can't go by sea because Daedalus has improved King Minos' fleet to the point that getting away from Crete on water is impossible. So he decides to fly. Sure. He gathers some wood and creates the wing, gathers a load of feathers and some wax, and seals down the feathers, starting with the small ones, where the big, to the tip, and creates a set of wings for him and for his son. And then very famous, they run off to the edge of the cliff, they jump off, and he tells his son, follow me, don't fly too low, for the water will catch your wings, don't fly too high, for the sun will melt the wax. And they get reasonably far, actually. It's said they go past Samos and a couple of other places, getting towards what is now Turkey. Really not quite direct route, but the way the wind blows, I guess. But Icarus gets a bit too ambitious and flies too close to the sun, most famously. Wax melts his wings, rather, and he falls into the ocean and drowns. Daedalus didn't notice at first in some versions. No, he noticed sort of after he turns around and then realised, oh shit, my son has disappeared. And the sea in which he landed is now known as the Icarian Sea, which is, like I said, just off the coast of Turkey between Kos and the island known as Icaria. This island was known as Icaria because Heracles, or Hercules if you prefer, I don't, dragged Icarus's body out of the water, or alternatively found him on the beach and buried him there and named the island after him. Sometime afterwards, Minos is still sort of out for revenge against Daedalus because Daedalus has fucked him over quite a few times, really. Daedalus goes on the run. He goes to Italy. He creates a very big temple of Apollo at Cumae. I'm not sure on the pronunciation of that one. Then he goes down to Sicily, to Kamikos, to meet with King Cocalus. King Cocalus gives him a very, very warm welcome indeed. He's a master craftsman, why wouldn't you want him that cool? King Minos is going around searching for him and eventually comes to Sicily, to Kamikos. And he's, knowing that Daedalus is this master craftsman and very, very cunning, he sets up a riddle that he believes only Daedalus will be able to solve to try and find him. What he does is he gets a sort of conch shell, spiraled sort of shell, and asks someone to thread some thread through it. Because it's such a fine hole or something, you've got to get it all the way through the spiral as well, which, you'd think you just pop it in one end and push it through and it would go, but apparently not. Daedalus falls for this, because King Cocalus gives him this challenge and says, do you know how to solve this riddle? So what he does is he ties some string to an ant, and then gets a bit of honey, puts it on the tip of the shell, and then lets the ant crawl through the inside and up and through, and then it's on a string. Which seems like a bit of a convoluted solution to a problem, but hey, if it works, it works. Upon finding out that the puzzle was solved, King Minos wants to get his revenge. Unfortunately, King Minos isn't very liked by really fucking anyone. So, and Daedalus is liked by King Cocalus, so Cocalus decides to save Daedalus. He invites King Minos round for dinner and says, why don't you take a bath before we dine? So King Minos goes to take a bath, and Cocalus' daughters and Daedalus boil him alive. Like, they pour boiling water over him and scald him to death. There's ways to go. That's not a pretty one. King Minos actually goes on to become one of the... he goes on down to Tartarus and sort of weighs people's souls as such. It's a very poor way of putting it, actually, because that's nothing like what it is. But he helps provide judgment over people that have died. Daedalus isn't really famous for much in terms of stories after that, but legacy-wise he did a lot. He created the walls around Agrigento, which would later become the Italian city of Agrigentum, created a temple to Aphrodite on Mount Eryx. He created some very big baths at Selinus, I believe. Also his statues. They were said to be so great and so lifelike. He created a fairly whole new style. He was said to be the one to liberate the arms from the body on the statue. What that means is if you look at, say, ancient Egyptian statues, they're very straight. Their arms are always by their sides. It can very easily be seen in the statues at the Ramesseum, which was the temple to Ramesses II. Very, very interesting historical figure. Fucked a lot. Had about 200 kids. Massive ego. Did a lot of things, Ramesses. Anyway, he... his statues are like that. The Ramesseum has four big statues of Ramesses with them sat. You can probably picture it if you've not seen it. It's massive. I really want to go there. But then you look at Greek statues, and the arms are away from the body, they're in very dynamic poses, and that's what Daedalus is said to have invented. He's also said to have opened their eyes as such, so rather than the Egyptians which had blank eyes, Daedalus carved in irises and pupils to make them more lifelike. So lifelike, in fact, that the great Hercules was said to have seen one of Daedalus's statues once. He might have been a bit drunk, according to some versions, but he thought it was so lifelike, he thought it was a fighter coming to attack him, and he decapitated it with his club and smashed it to bits. He did apologise to Daedalus afterwards, because Heracles was generally a bit of a nice guy. But yeah, that's the quality of statue crafting we're talking about here. The end of Daedalus's life isn't really spoken about too much. He said to have led a quiet existence as such, died of old age, really, presumably. Nothing else is mentioned of him. There are things that say he went to Egypt. He apparently created the temple of Hephaestus in Memphis, which was the Egyptian capital. It's not quite where Cairo is, but it's close enough. Yeah. He created... apparently said to have died in Egypt and had a statue to himself there. Wooden statues are often associated with him, but that's also from the Homeric term Daedalus, which is reference to a statue that has been very well crafted, and it's very, very commonly used with wooden statues, so Daedalus does get associated with it. The fact that Daedalus is associated with Sicily in particular is kind of interesting, because there is some evidence that says Cretan contact with Sicily and Italy. It's not really too secure, but at the same point, then he is also has some ties to Asia Minor, particularly the area known as Lydia. And again, there is some very, very light evidence, don't say it's fully proven by any stretch, but that the peoples of Crete and the peoples of Sicily share a genetic heritage from Lydia, that sort of area, which that's sort of about the spread of people across the Mediterranean through the Levant and up through Turkey and so forth, which again we can't fully prove or disprove, or we're never going to know. That's pretty much all there is to say about Daedalus. It's a tragic story, is one, really. All his losses can often be said to be attributed to Athena punishing him for his jealousy of his nephew. There are actually other interpretations of the story, especially the one with Icarus, that are less fantastical. So, I can't remember who it was, I think it's Pausanias, but I'm not sure, believed that the wings as such were more a metaphor for sails, and that was to do with Daedalus inventing sails on ships. So, he wouldn't be able to escape Crete, because their ships had rams and were rowed by many rowers, but he then created a ship with a sail, and Icarus fell overboard rather than falling from the sky. It's possible. It's a less interesting version of the story, but it's arguably a much more realistic one. As for anything else about Daedalus, I don't think there actually is much more to say, but thank you for all those who've watched my previous video and this one so far. Please do provide any comments and questions and suggestions for what else you'd like me to talk about. I've got a long list of ideas, but if there's anything you'd particularly want, go for it. I'm always open to suggestions. So, thank you, and bye.